Ryan here with Dark Rangers Inc. And a couple of weeks ago, I asked you guys what you're looking for going forward, and I got a lot of great ideas. And one that was really common and I heard a lot was a question and answer. Last week we did one on target acquisition and how to pick out your targets. The one thing I didn't mention in there, but I did kind of indirectly by mentioning following the specific seasons, was looking at altitude. If you followed my suggestions on what type of targets for what type of year, they naturally will be up in altitude, but I didn't mention that specifically, and I thought about that afterwards. I always do look to make sure that the target is going to get nice and high in the night sky, and so I'll typically wait until they're kind of peaking, hopefully towards the middle of the night. That way I get a lot of time rising up and then on the way down. But one thing I want to do is maybe a somewhat regular question and answer. It can be a little bit more informal. As you can see, we're just in the garage where I work on stuff, behind me on the workbench. If I'm traveling, that way I can do one that's quick, kind of informal. I've got a list of 6 questions. If you sent them via email, they got prioritized first, ryan@darkrangersinc.com, and then I took some off of the comment section as well. So feel free to keep sending me those. I will continue to answer them, maybe 6 or 7 at a time, depending on how complicated the answers are, because I want to keep them relatively short but informative. So the first question is data archiving. How do you save, archive your data? What devices do you use? How much redundancies and what files to save, etc. So I have changed that up in the last year, and I think I've got pretty much my final setup with one little exception that I'll change in the future, but what I'm currently using is very close. So I have both of my Eagles imaging, and then they obviously have their own storage, so I kind of let the file sit on there for a while, so that's kind of one level of redundancy, if you want to call that. And then when I finish a project, I will upload it onto one of these SanDisk 2 terabyte drives, and then what I do is I'll blink off of this drive. So I take this to my Eagle, I transfer everything. When my Eagle gets full, it's automatically updating to Google OneDrive. So there's an automatic upload feature on there, and I have it set to the Nina folder that all of my images are saving to. So when you select your save folder in Nina, you can tell it what folder to put the images to, and then you can do the same in Google OneDrive so that it's automatically uploading that. So that's a cloud redundancy, which is really, I think, the best form of redundancy from what I hear. A lot of people say that, you know, HDD or these extra drives aren't really considered a form of true redundancy or backup. So I transfer it from the Eagle onto here, and then I plug this into my computer. I look at all the files in Blink and then do a visual scan. I use that little blue arrow with the folder icon at the bottom of the Blink folder and then transfer that. All the approved ones will go to my NVMe external drive. So this is just an enclosure, and then inside there I have a 2 terabyte NVMe. This is just some, you know, kind of heat tape to dissipate some of the heat. And then what this does is it allows me to work a lot faster than one of these drives. So these claim to be about 1,000 megabytes per second, but when I actually test them, they're closer to like 600 or 700, whereas this is a 40 gigabit per second, which in real world gets me about 2,800 megabytes per second. Now my computer hard drive, I have a MacBook Pro, is over 5,000, but I don't want to fill that up. I want to keep that mostly free. I do video editing and I also do astrophotography. Both are pretty data intensive. And so when this gets full, I recently got an 8 terabyte HDD. So these are SSD, solid state drive. I got an HDD, which is good for cheap bulk storage. So it's the old school spinning drive. That's what NAS drives are. I am figuring out what I want to do in terms of a NAS or NAS, the network attached storage. So in the meantime, I got a Western Digital 8 terabyte drive, and I have it set up as a time machine. So it's automatically saving everything off of my MacBook and this as well. So I set this up as one of the automatic save drives. And so every day it's basically backing it up. And so when this gets full, I can just go ahead and delete it. Everything that I save in terms of the final image, I do save onto my MacBook because it automatically gets sent up into the iCloud. So I have 2 cloud services. I have OneDrive. When you have a professional business email like the Ryan at Dark Rangers Inc., you have to pay a monthly amount, and it really wasn't that much more to add a bunch of storage. So I have that going, and then I have 6 terabytes in iCloud as well. So that's really my redundancy. In terms of what files I keep, I do match the flats in the project folder that I'm working on. So I generally just save the subframes. I go ahead and delete the calibrated and registered because they are usually a larger file size and I don't need a double and triplicate. If I'm going to add data on in the future, I'll stack it all together and I can use, you know, different keywords or in APP different sessions to separate the flats that I have saved with the older data and then add the new flats to the new data. So I know it all sounds kind of complicated, but it really isn't once you get the system set up. But yeah, the main thing is just taking it off of my computer that I have on my actual telescope, transferring it to here, using this to blink to get it onto here, and then having my Eagle backed up with OneDrive, and then my main computer backed up with an HDD and iCloud. So that's how I do it. All right, question number 2, cleaning telescope optics. I know that less is better, but if you need to clean, what is the best process and materials that won't harm coated optics, cotton balls, Kim whites, microfibers, isopropyl alcohol, etc.? So most of the time, guys, you just want to use air, whether you have one of those little hand blasters that you squeeze. I will also use this guy that has a filtration system, and I always make sure it's clean. It has 2 speeds, so a low and a high. You don't want to use too much air compression because you don't want to blow any dust past the seals. But most of the time, a little bit of dust is okay. If air doesn't get rid of it and there's some light dust speckles on your front objective, it's really not going to affect your image. I know a lot of you guys are OCD and it drives you crazy to see those dust specks on there and you think you're going to ruin your image. When you see dust motes on your actual flat frames, that is from your filters and your sensor windows. So clean your filters, you know, you can clean those a little bit more often probably because they're going to have a bigger impact. I typically use koala stuff, which I know you guys know. They come in 2 different sizes. They have these small ones which fold out to be about this big, and then this is the big one which fold out to 4 times the size. And then this is specifically, it's lens safe, alcohol free, fragrance free. This stuff is, you know, supposedly made in Japan. I just get it on Amazon. I have tried probably 15 or 20 different microfibers to get to this. I don't work with these guys. I'm not affiliated with them anyway. I just found them and they are significantly better than any other microfiber I've tried. Kim wipes to me just kind of like smear the liquid around and they don't do a great job absorbing. And then the cotton ones tend to leave just a little bit of lint. They absorb well, but then they leave, you know, like little lint fibers. These do the best combination of not leaving any lint behind and they absorb well at the same time. I use them once and I toss them. So you can get a 24 pack of these for about 25 bucks if you get them on sale. So a little over $1 a piece. And then these are a little more expensive. They're 10 bucks for 3. But yeah, I generally use them once for actual lens or filters. And then I just use them for general cleaning after that. You could potentially try to wash them, but then you have to be really careful about what type of cleaner you're using or soap to wash it. If it has fragrance, if it has anything, any type of chemical that could potentially stay in the cloth. And the biggest thing, guys, use gloves. Even if you're thinking, well, I'll make sure that I'm really careful and I don't touch the glass with my greasy fingers, you're transferring your grease onto this microfiber and then you're smearing it all over your lens. And that's why sometimes it might look like, man, I just can't get it fully clean. You're transferring all this gross stuff off of there. I spray it always on the cloth first and then do it very lightly. I'm talking as light as I humanly possibly can. If I can just do dabs, that's obviously the best way. But if I do, it's a very, very light and then flip it over to the other side and very, very light. Like as light as I can humanly touch it. You don't want to cause micro scratches by taking those dust particles and smashing them into the lens. That's why it's important to use the air first to get as much of the bigger chunks off. And if you are gonna do that, guys, less really is more. A lot of times you're gonna do more harm than good. And double check with your telescope company to make sure that whatever cleaner you're using is safe for the coatings on the lenses. So if you do see dust spots and particles on the objective, it's fine. It's still gonna gather light. You know, don't obsess over it, but when it gets really bad, obviously just be very cautious. All right, question number 3 was on collimating your SCT. I don't have a SCT. I have the, whatever they call it, the Super Cassegrain Astrograph, the SCA 260. That has a 2-mirror setup. There is a really good video by Dylan O'Donnell. I'll put the link below in the description. He does a really good job showing you how to do it like with one tool. He probably does the best explanation I've seen. It's super simple. It's really light on the tools. And so on this one, I am going to defer to him, as I think he is definitely an expert in using SCTs, uses them all the time, and he seems to have a really simple way. So check the description for that. Number 4, building your own observatory versus a remote dark sky site break-even point. So I am lucky enough to have a couple of Dark Ranger Inc. community member at both ends of the spectrum in terms of building your own observatory like in your backyard. We have on one end Brian, who you might have seen in the solar episode this spring. He did a great job helping me out because he's very knowledgeable in all things astrophotography related, and he's also very handy. Brian actually designed his own observatory from CAD from the ground up. It's a 2-scope observatory slide-off roof, and basically went the full DIY version, even milled his own lumber, and this really helped keep costs down. So his all-in cost minus the concrete slab was about $3,700, and then another $500 in concrete for a total of $4,200. So that's basically the lowest you could expect, likely for a roll-off roof 2-scope observatory. It's not huge, but it is big enough to comfortably fit 2 scopes, although it is a little bit tight. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Michelle, who's also a Dark Ranger Inc. community member. She's the one I went out to Vermont and helped her switch from an ASI Air to a Nina setup, and we're actually in the process of putting together her second rig, which will be awesome. And she basically went the complete polar opposite route, where she had a company come in and build it for her. Most of the cost that she experienced was in the labor, but it's also a larger structure, fully automated slide-off roof. It does have some nice features that maybe aren't needed but are nice to have, and her total budget was around $25,000. So basically under $5,000 to $25,000, depending on how much you can do and what features and functionalities you want for a roll-off roof 2-scope observatory. Now you can do kind of those dome styles that are, you know, maybe a little bit more than Brian paid, but those are going to have some limitations, and that's actually what Michelle started with. We had issues getting to the southern sky because of the way the dome was angled, and you have to get out there and kind of fuss with it sometimes. So roll-off roof does seem to be the way to go. But besides that, really the bigger question you have to ask yourself is, how long do you plan on staying where you currently are? And do you have the sky conditions to warrant spending the investment on building your own observatory? Currently, right now, I use Telegizmo 365 in the back because I know they are not at their permanent home. And as the name implies, 365, it protects it. There's a solar liner on the inside and a waterproof cover on the outside, and it does a great job. And I guess this is where I can let the cat out of the bag and let you guys know I am going to be parking a scope at Dark Sky, New Mexico, and that's about $600 a month. You have others that are in the $800 range, like Utah, and the Sierra Remote Observatory is $1,200 to $1,800 depending on your setup. I know there is that new one in Texas that's $200 for like a really small rig. My rig there that I'm going to be putting would probably be in the $400 to $500 range. So for an extra $100 a month, I really wanted to go with a reputable place in true Bortle 1 skies that have 280 to 300 good nights of imaging with the ability to go sub-arc second scene. So just really fantastic conditions. They've been in business for a while, and your scope will be insured and well looked after. Now, the big breaking point there is, you know, in terms of the question around what's the break even for pricing, if you went with the low cost route like Brian, it'd be basically about 10 months. And if you went with the high end like Michelle, it'd be about 41 months. But I really wouldn't look at it that way. It's more about what is the best option for you versus what is the cost break even point. Now, to really get the most out of your equipment, obviously being under dark skies is key. So Michelle is in Bortle 3, Brian's in Bortle 4 or 5. So not terrible conditions. If you are in a high Bortle class area or you do experience a lot of clouds, it probably would be a good idea to look into going remote, and it's not as intimidating as you might think. I actually really hadn't considered it until recently when another Dark Ranger Inc. community member, Rafael, shared his experience at Dark Sky, New Mexico, and it really is a lot more approachable than you think. And to make it even more approachable, I will be putting out an episode on some of the equipment upgrades you may need to make if you don't already have them, and then actually driving the 23 hours out there, putting up the scope, and then all of my experiences with that. So hopefully I will make it more of an option for you guys and make sure that you guys are really getting the most out of your equipment. So when it comes to building your own observatory versus going remote, I don't think it's so much an issue of cost as it is what's going to be the better situation for you. If you know that you could be moving in the next 2 to 3 years, definitely not worth it. But if you're at your kind of forever home or a place you're going to be for a long time and you have decent skies, I think the home observatory is a great route. If you know that you're not going to be where you are for a long time, but you still want to experience really good sky conditions and know your scope is going to be taken care of and safe, then a good remote site is probably going to be the better option in that situation. All right, question number 5, how to balance a harmonic drive mount on the deck axis. Now, as you guys know, one of the key features of harmonic drives is you don't technically have to balance them. It's actually almost impossible to tell if they are balanced because they don't have a clutch system where you can release the motor and test to see if it's balanced or not. One thing I thought of though when I got this question is how could you theoretically do it though if you wanted to make sure you're putting the least strain possible on the motor and kind of balance it in an artificial way. So what I thought of was getting something that's kind of flat on both sides but still narrow enough to show balance. And I thought of getting something like a carpenter's pencil or something like that and putting your scope on a table where it's just only maybe a couple millimeters off the ground, and that way you can determine the balance point and then maybe just put a mark and then put that mark in the center of the clamp. And that way, even though you don't technically have to be balanced, your scope would be balanced from a weight perspective, and that could potentially help with guiding accuracy and the longevity of the scope. Now, do I know that that's a thing? No, I don't, but it does kind of make sense that if you are evening out the strain on the motor, it's more likely to last longer and hopefully be a little bit more accurate. So it may be something that you want to do. As somebody that has used equatorial mounts as well, I kind of know visually looking at where a scope is set up, the kind of balance point, and I can usually guess within an inch or two. And so I do, when I am setting up something with a harmonic drive, I do kind of try to balance it that way on the deck axis. But if you wanted to do it precisely, that was a way I just came up with, since it's not something that's really been asked before. Number 6 is how to drizzle and dither and when and what the difference is. So drizzle and dither kind of sound like the same thing, and this question comes up a lot. I'm not going to go really deep on this because this really could get an episode on its own. I'm just going to give you some really high-level rules to make it simple for you. So the first thing you want to do is Google CCD suitability calculator, CCD suitability calculator. And you don't have to worry about looking up your specific camera and scope unless you don't know what size pixel your camera is. Then there is a whole drop down. If you're using like a 2600 or 6200 style, you know it's 3.7 microns. And then under the scope, I just leave it at custom scope and put in my focal length. And then what you want to do is find your arc second per pixel imaging scale or resolution. So there's different qualities that you want for different seeing conditions. You'll see there's a scale below, you can put in your numbers, and then it will basically tell you where on the scale you fall. You can see your seeing conditions, either some weather apps that are kind of Astro specific have that on there. You can also kind of look at your full width half maximum, which is kind of complicated if you're asking a question like this. But sites like Telescopius will give you an idea of what your seeing conditions might be. And then you really want to avoid being undersampled. And you're going to be most likely undersampled when you have a small focal length, so like 250, 300, all the way up to maybe even 500 or 600 with a 3.7 micron pixel. The bigger your pixel is, the more you're going to be undersampled with the same focal length. So if you have a small scope, a smaller pixel is going to help you be properly sampled. When you're properly sampled, you're going to get the most detail and resolution out of your image. So the really simple rule of thumb for me is for good seeing, good to okay seeing, you want to be a little bit under 1 on that ratio. And my 140 SVX is at 960 millimeters with a 3.7 micron pixel. Puts me right at like 0.8. So with that one, I don't drizzle. Now the 102 is at 515 millimeters, so I'm well over 1. When I drizzle, it puts me, because it basically cuts that ratio in half. That's really what a 2x drizzle is doing. It's basically doubling your resolution, and it's going to kind of synthetically give you half of that ratio. So if I was at maybe 1.45, now I'm right in between 0.75 and 0.8. So basically the same resolution as my 140. So then I go from being undersampled to properly sampled. So if you're new and you don't want to go through all of that, if you're using a small scope and you know what your pixel size is, if you're kind of in that, 1 and above and your seeing is good, you may want to consider drizzle. Anything from like a red cat where you're at 250, going up to like an 80 millimeter, that's probably at like 4 to 450, all the way up to I'd say 600 millimeters is a for sure 2x drizzle. Above 600 millimeters, it's really going to depend on your seeing conditions. The better your seeing conditions, the lower that number you can handle. So you can go maybe down to like 0.6 or 0.5 or even 0.4 if you have really good seeing conditions. If you have really bad seeing conditions, you might want to be over 1.0. So maybe leaving it at 1.5 if you're, around 500 millimeters, that might be more ideal than doing a 2x drizzle. But if you're under, okay, good skies, and you have a small scope, 2x drizzle is going to be good. If you have a larger scope or you're under really bad skies, then just leave it at its native resolution of 1x. So that's really just the high level rule for you guys. Dither you want to do all the time. And all dither's doing is it's moving the image by a few pixels each time so that you don't get walking noise. It also helps dither and is essential for dither to work. I used to do a 10 or 20 pixel dither because that's what I was suggested early on. I have been talking to somebody that works at Astro who makes some of the best mounts in the world, and he was telling me that literally just a couple pixels is all you need. So I dropped it down to 5. Having too big of a pixel isn't a bad thing. It's just going to create a bigger shift on every image, so you're going to have more area around the outside of the frame that's not going to be usable. So I'm going to drop it back down to 5, and then on SHO images or narrowband images, I typically do it every 3 to 5 images depending on how big the project's going to be, and then almost always like 5 to 7 for LRGB. Now the less total frames you're going to do, the more often you want to do it. I usually do about 100 per channel at least with SHO, so about 100 by either 5 or 10 minute exposures, and then with LRGB, because they're shorter exposures, I'm usually closer to like 200 per filter. If you're only going to do maybe 40 or 50 frames, then you probably want to do it either every frame or every other frame to really get the good sample size of dither and get the effect that you're looking for. But really, I don't want you guys to overcomplicate it. You have to dither every time if you want to use drizzle eventually and if you want to eliminate walking noise. So 5 pixels every few images is going to be great. And if you're new and you're looking at drizzle, if you're using a wide field, 600 millimeters and below, for sure look at a 2x drizzle. It does reduce your signal to noise a little bit, so just be aware you're going to want to get more data to offset that, but it's going to get you properly sampled. It's going to get you a better resolution and hopefully bring out some more of those fine details so that you're not undersampled and your images look a little bit soft. If you're over 600, then it really kind of is up to your specific conditions in terms of seeing and what you're looking to accomplish. It also does make the file a lot bigger, so if you are conscious of space and hard drive space, just know that it's going to eat up a lot more of that as well, because by doubling the resolution, it's going to make the image size a lot bigger, and so just be aware of that. For example, on a full frame 6200 or 600 MQHY, the drizzled 2x image is about 2 gigabytes per, so an SHO is 6 gigabytes just for one image. So keep that in mind. It's going to be a lot smaller, obviously, if you're using an APS-C or micro Four Thirds sensor, but just be aware it is going to eat up a lot more space. And guys, that'll do it. I'm going to keep doing these every month or so if you guys want it. It's something that I can do for you guys and just answer a wide variety of questions that I get all the time. Hopefully this was helpful. Until the next one, guys, as always, clear skies.
If you made it this far, you're a true Dark Ranger, a real gangster of the night sky. Like and subscribe and join the best community in astrophotography.